Welcome to the preview of episode 14 of the telenovela Sultan. Emir Salahuddin was speaking with his cousin, trying to make him understand that the most important thing was to take refuge in God, because the situation with the Sultan was not looking good. The Sultan was extremely angry, especially because he was not satisfied with what was happening, and for him, it was unacceptable that, having so many fortresses around, they did not want Bakras to be used as a winter garrison. According to him, that made no sense at all. Hearing those words, his cousin Nsepli responded calmly, trying to reassure him, and told him that the best thing would be for him to explain everything directly to the Sultan himself, because perhaps then he would manage to make him understand and prevent him from getting even angrier. In addition, he advised him that after delivering all the gold coins to their rightful owners and making sure they arrived complete and in good condition, he should go to Damascus, because they were waiting for him there to resolve pending matters related to Bakras. He also reminded him that his duty was to report in detail everything that was happening in that region, attend to the failures within the garrison, and ensure that important decisions were made as quickly as possible. When Emir Salahuddin heard this, he paused for a moment and asked his cousin why he was telling him all this with such insistence. Then Nsepli explained that the reason was that Bakras had been named as a garrison, and the gold that had been promised for that cause had ended up being collected from the people. This had provoked unrest, because merchants and craftsmen were very unsettled. Rumors spread everywhere, and many were murmuring that eventually, new taxes would be imposed so that the wealthy could keep the tributes. Upon hearing this explanation, Emir Salahuddin said he did not understand how they could so quickly forget what they had eaten in Trigamai, as if they did not appreciate what they had been given. But his cousin replied that of course they had not forgotten, although the truth was that they were genuinely angry, because none of this seemed like an act of goodwill. Furthermore, he warned him that there was a fox planning to use this situation to turn them against the people and take advantage of the confusion. Hearing this, Emir Salahuddin said that the first thing he should do was to go consult with the Qadi, find out exactly what was happening, and prepare himself to face the people if necessary. But before anything else, he had to make sure that the gold was delivered to its rightful owners in order to avoid further problems. After all this exchange of words, the two of them said their farewells, and Emir Salahuddin set off on his way, making it clear that he had many pending matters to resolve. Meanwhile, Qadi was walking firmly to meet with the Vizier, for he needed to speak with him about some urgent matters. When he arrived, he realized that the Vizier was not alone, but accompanied by Senher, who followed him like his shadow. When Qadi approached, he told the Vizier that he had finally agreed to receive the commander, which had been something long pending. The Vizier replied that if he was doing it reluctantly, then it was not a simple matter, because restoring order throughout the town was no easy task. Even so, he assured him that he would work day and night with Senher to find a solution. Upon hearing these words, Qadi expressed his wish that God would grant him the success he so badly needed. But he also pointed out that, despite all the security measures taken, the town remained in disorder and the people's complaints did not cease. In fact, he handed Senher a pile of written petitions so that he could deliver them to the Vizier. Senher looked at him unpleasantly, as if he disliked what was happening. The Vizier, noticing that exchange of looks, asked Qadi to tell him exactly what the problem was. Qadi explained clearly that the issue was the taxes, which had become far too high and were being imposed on everyone without exception. This had placed the merchants in a very difficult situation, for they were on the verge of the planting season, and with such an economic burden, they did not know how to move forward. Senher, showing no compassion, replied that no one was obliged to evade them and that there was no other option but to pay the debts, because they could not act otherwise. Qadi insisted, saying that if the matter had been taken to the other commander, perhaps they would have found a different solution, recalling that in the past they used to take long-term loans from the wealthy of Alexandria in order to get through. The Vizier, somewhat annoyed, retorted, asking if what he wanted was to place all the people in the hands of the Jewish moneylenders. Qadi answered that this was not his intention, but that if necessary, he himself would speak with them, consult the matter, and consider the possibility of postponing the payment of everyone's debts. While they were arguing, the Vizier suddenly heard a great commotion outside. There were many people shouting insistently, wanting to come in and speak with him. Amidst all that noise, the voice of one of his own guards could also be heard, and he too sounded agitated. The Vizier immediately rose from his chair, and both Qadi and Senher turned to see what was happening. At that moment, a guard entered and informed the Vizier that Commander Mahmud was outside and demanding to speak with him. Upon hearing this, Qadi grew frightened and glanced sideways at the Vizier, and Senher did the same, but the Vizier did not care in the least and ordered that he be allowed to enter. As soon as he came in, Commander Mahmud began to speak in a furious tone, but before anything else, He introduced himself, greeted, and also presented all those who accompanied him, clarifying that he hoped the vizier was well. The vizier gave him the floor, and it was then that Mahmud began to pour out his anger. He told him that, unfortunately, they were not well and were trying to survive under the heavy burden of the decree that imposed taxes on them. He asked him directly if he was aware of what was happening in the country, because Egypt was suffering under such harsh tributes. He added that, meanwhile, the wealthy were distributing gold to the immigrants. That left the vizier astonished, and he turned to look at Cuddy, searching for an answer. Cuddy tried to clarify that the gold did not come from the treasury and that things were not as Mahmud believed, since there were precedents that explained that movement, assuring that it was about payments made by the immigrants for their properties. But Commander Mahmud simply laughed with distrust, as if he did not believe a single word. With firmness, Mahmud told the vizier that surely everyone would say the same lie, because there existed a secret society among them, and he was certain that the vizier himself had already received his share. That made the vizier explode in rage, and he shouted at him not to say another word nor dare provoke him, because he was not willing to tolerate such insolence. Mahmud, undaunted, replied that he had to put an end immediately to that injustice, because the people were not obliged to support anyone with their taxes. His companions began shouting loudly, demanding that it was not fair for everything they paid to benefit others nor for gold to be distributed in such a way. With all his accumulated anger, Mahmud warned the vizier that he had better find a quick solution, or else he himself would take care of resolving it by force. That made the vizier rise from his chair, very agitated, and he told him not to start with his threats, not to be insolent, and that the best thing he could do was to get out of his sight immediately. But Mahmud did not obey, and it was then that Senhur called for the soldiers. The atmosphere turned chaotic. Everyone was shouting, some demanding whether that was the dignified way to treat the people, while the soldiers began to forcibly drag out the commander's companions. In the midst of the confusion, Mahmud hurled one last phrase at the vizier, reminding him that he had been waiting 40 years for justice. When things calmed down a little, the vizier, still furious, turned to Cuddy and asked him how it was possible that, obeying the orders of the wealthy, he was now attempting to incite the people against him. Without even giving him the chance to explain himself, he cut him off and told him he did not want to hear any excuses, that the best thing was for Emir Salahuddin to resolve it all. Immediately afterward, he hurled the petitions against his chest roughly. Senhur, enjoying the scene, only smiled mockingly, while the vizier and Cuddy stared directly into each other's eyes. Finally, Cuddy, very angry and unwilling to continue arguing, picked up the petitions and left with them in hand. One of Emir Salahuddin's companions told him that the doctor had already managed to disperse all the sick people and was also praying together with the crowd. While they were talking about this, Emir Salahuddin and his men continued walking until they reached the place where the poets were gathered. Upon arrival, he was surprised to see Semsi and Layla sitting among the people. Smiling, he approached to greet them and then sat beside them to share the moment. At that instant, an old man was playing a small guitar and accompanied the music with verses, reciting and singing poems that captured everyone's attention. The people settled around, enjoying in silence as they watched. Semsi could not hide the joy she felt at seeing Emir Salahuddin arrive, because for her, his presence changed everything. But Emir, with a serious expression, asked her for a special favor. He explained that he wanted her, when she had the opportunity to go to the holy city, to set foot in the mosque on his behalf and send greetings and respect to that sacred place. He also asked her to deliver the message that soon they would gather there. Semsi assured him she would do it, but she asked if that meant he himself would go for a visit. Emir replied that it was not just a matter of visiting, but of reclaiming what belonged to them, that he would return to reconquer what was lost. Meanwhile, the young poet finished chanting his verses and the people, moved, began to applaud enthusiastically. Amidst the applause, Layla whispered to Semsi to look ahead. When she did, she noticed that the young poet was signaling to her, indicating that the next song would be for her. That drew everyone's attention. Emir Salahuddin thanked the young man with a kind gesture, and the latter, encouraged, started playing his guitar again, preparing new verses while the audience watched in anticipation. But just at that moment something unexpected happened. From afar, someone shot an arrow that struck directly into the young man's neck, leaving a note attached. The atmosphere of calm and poetry was shattered instantly. Emir Salahuddin reacted immediately. He covered Semsi with his own body and ordered her to take the girl and get her to safety. Around them, the place was filled with screams and chaos, everyone running in panic at the bloody scene. Two people ran desperately in the opposite direction, while Emir Salahuddin picked up the note that remained on the young man's body. He opened it and read it with seriousness, discovering that it mentioned a wealthy man dressed in yellow, who came from the Crusaders, and that it announced chaos would soon come. Meanwhile, the man who had fired the arrow used the turmoil to escape. Upon learning what the note said, Halil and the other friends of Emir were completely frightened, not knowing what to do in the face of such a dark threat looming over them. Latif went to visit his father Siet, and upon arriving began telling him that in the middle of the market he had seen an herbal shop. While they talked, Latif could not help but say how excited he was about the idea, but that he hoped his father would not do anything improper with it, that the best thing would be to use it to bring the cure to the market in the proper way. Siet, with his firm character, replied that the market belonged to him and so did the cure, and that he would continue distributing it at no cost, gathering all the necessary materials so that the people could benefit. Suddenly, Commander Mahmud appeared and joined the conversation. He told Siet that the rich were throwing shining gold over them, as if it belonged to them. Siet did not hesitate to answer that this gold did not belong to the rich and that it had nothing to do with Emir Salahuddin, since thanks to him everyone had what was rightfully theirs. But Mahmud, harshly, replied that this was the same lie he had heard from Cuddy and that such excuses he could tell anyone else, but not him. Siet, enraged by his words, furiously asked him if he was calling him a liar. Commander Mahmud did not back down and told him that not only did he consider him a liar, but also twice as deceitful. That ignited the atmosphere even more, and both ended up grabbing each other by the neck, struggling and shouting. In the middle of the fight, Siet told him to listen, that all the gold legitimately belonged to them, while Mahmud shouted that he would not allow them to take advantage of Egypt's wealth. It was then that Latif tried to intervene to separate them, placing himself between the two. Mahmud, still upset, told Siet not to think he would let himself be subdued by the rich and not to forget it. Siet replied that it was best for him to mind his own business. Seeing that the fight was leading nowhere, Latif tried to calm his father, telling him not to worry, but clearly a great problem was approaching. Siet, firm in his decision, answered that he was not afraid to claim what was his and that the first thing he would do was to speak with Semsit to immediately take away the key to the shop. After saying this, he left very angry, almost running, while Latif watched him leave with concern. Meanwhile, in another place, Kantu was sitting and eating. Around him were several soldiers also sharing food, and one of them commented that he gave thanks to the Lord for having arrived on time, because otherwise that castle would have ended up in the hands of the Muslims. He added that the rich were becoming more and more aggressive and that they needed someone to stop them. Kantu, although he was listening to everything, pretended disinterest, as if he were not paying attention. However, the soldiers continued with their conversations and began to speak directly about Kontuk, saying that he was already dead and that his brother, whom they considered a coward, had also shown no sign of life. Kanta listened to every word in silence, accumulating rage inside, but he restrained himself and decided to do nothing at that moment, swallowing his anger. On the other hand, the Sibyl called her husband, Lord Jayam, quite upset, looking for an explanation. But he, with forced calm, asked her to calm down. She, insistent, demanded that he not ask her for calm, but rather tell her what was happening, what those actions meant, and where they were leading him. She even asked him if everything that was happening had to do with the will of today. Jayam, without giving too many answers, told her they would talk later, while a soldier escorted him to the dungeon. In the midst of that tense scene, Lord, who was watching everything nearby, noticed the suffering of the Sibyl. He commented to a friend that surely she needed help and decided to approach her to speak. With a serious expression, he told her that it was quite difficult to witness something like that, but that he regretted having to tell her that her husband had been turned into a Sibyl and was being taken to the darkest and deepest part of the castle. She, confused and hurt, asked him for a clearer explanation, asking what was happening and of what crime her husband was being accused. But Lord did not want to get involved in those matters, so he sent her to speak directly with her father, assuring her that he did know everything and that it was better for him to explain it to her. The Sibyl, desperate, ran off in search of her father, hoping that he would reveal the truth. The young men continued talking animatedly, unaware that Kantu was there, attentive to every word. Amid laughter and remarks, one of them said that they all should become the Count, assuring that only then would they obtain a true result. Kantu, upon hearing such a thing, could not contain his fury and struck the table hard, making everyone turn in surprise to look at him. One of them mockingly asked what was wrong, if perhaps he hadn't liked the food. Kontu, with his eyes blazing, answered that he knew Count Hugu very well and was sure they would not dare to say such a thing to his face. He warned them that what they had just said was pure envy, and that it was best for them to shut their mouths immediately. Instead of silencing, the others began laughing louder and even sent one of them to watch him closely. That soldier stood up and mockingly asked Kontu if he missed Count Hugu so much, hinting that if he wanted, he could reunite him with him. The friends burst into laughter, enjoying the provocation. Kontu, firm, replied that he would never separate from the Count, that their bond was unbreakable. It was then that one of them approached, grabbed him strongly, and asked who he thought he was. Kontu, filled with rage, reacted by striking him without hesitation. The tension exploded, and soon all of them drew their swords, beginning a bloody fight. Kontu, with skill and fury, began to face each one, mortally wounding them. One by one they fell, and upon reaching the one who had mocked him the most, he pierced him with his sword. As he did so, he coldly told him to send greetings to his brother, leaving him lifeless on the ground, lying in front of everyone. In another place, the vizier addressed Emir Salahuddin harshly. He asked him why there was so much disorder outside, if the people were in rebellion and fighting each other. He emphasized that the only thing he wanted was that, despite all the warnings, he should secure the city as was proper. Cuddy, who was present, remarked that there were other hands involved behind all that chaos, but the vizier replied that he should not look for culprits so far away. He looked directly at Emir Salahuddin and told him that while he distributed gold to whomever he pleased, that made justice tilt wherever it suited him. Emir answered that he had given the gold to the Muslims and that the matter should be closed once and for all. The vizier, very upset, rebuked him harshly, demanding that he tell him what all that meant, reminding him that neither the turban of a rich man nor the boot of a crusader could weigh more than what was at stake, because what he was doing harmed himself more than anyone else. He warned him to take those words as a warning, asking why the people, who at the beginning had welcomed him with enthusiasm, were now turning their backs on him. He pointed out that everything was written on the paper he held in his hands. Emir Salahuddin acknowledged that he was right, that surely they blamed him for the high taxes. At that moment, Emi intervened and said that all of that had to be solved quickly, because if they found him in that state of weakness, they would crush him mercilessly. The vizier agreed, saying that would be the only correct way and that in this manner Egypt could once again trust its rulers. After those words, they all left and left the vizier alone. In the midst of the movement of the market, where everyone was busy selling their products and attending to people, Urfa appeared with an agitated air. He came murmuring under his breath, arguing with himself, saying how it was possible that they had sent the gold to the market and treated the people as if nothing had happened, without even giving him notice. He spoke to himself, upset, walking among the stalls. At that moment, he approached a vendor and, without asking permission, began to open the food he had for sale without paying. The vendor, surprised and annoyed, reproached him, telling him that now everything had gone up in price, asking if it bothered him that he charged. Urfa reacted with more rage, as if the complaint had wounded his pride. The vendor, firm, replied that he worked day and night to sustain himself, and that thanks to people like him they had managed to save themselves from the hands of Durgam. Urfa stared at him angrily and warned him to be careful with what he said, that he would cut his mouth if he kept talking like that, because he should be grateful. But the vendor was not intimidated and replied that, in reality, the problem was Urfa himself, because he always wanted to take things for free. That enraged him even more, and he shouted at him to shut up, that he did not know who he was talking to, that he was someone strong and respected, and that he was going to take that cucumber to make himself a salad without asking anyone's permission. In the distance, one of the men watching the argument from his stall was paying close attention to the scene. Urfa, beside himself, threatened to cut the vendor's throat, but the latter immediately backed away and nervously offered him a coin to calm him down, begging him not to get involved with him. The man said those kinds were like feathers, easy to move with any wind. Urfa, instead of calming down, became even more emboldened. He raised his voice and began shouting that they had angered him, that everyone should look at him well because he was Urfa, the one who kept order in the market and who was blessed. According to him, without his help, no one there would have worked. While he continued proclaiming his importance, a friend of his who was accompanying him tried to make him come to his senses and asked him if he had gone mad. But Urfa did not stop. He went on shouting that everyone should know their place and respect his honor. When he tried to leave, His friend warned him that there was no way out in that direction, that there was no such thing as a Shalilda. Urfa, however, insisted that Pharaoh had proclaimed his divinity by distributing generosity to all, and that he deserved a special place. Finally, his friend, with patience, told him to come with him to a new shop, that after all that uproar, the kindness of the owner would be like medicine that would calm him down. At that moment Urfa's friend remarked that in Cairo there had never arrived someone like Humaira, someone so striking and different. Then Urfa entered the conversation, but his friend told him that he thought he knew something about fragrances, and seeing his reaction it became clear that he didn't know much, exposing his ignorance. Urfa, without giving much importance to that comment, kept staring at Humaira and noticed how beautiful she was, so much so that for an instant he was captivated by her beauty. She looked at him and asked directly if he was Urfa. He did not respond with words, he simply laughed with a mischievous expression on his face, while his friend intervened and clarified to Humaira that indeed he had just arrived. Humaira, with a smile, commented that everyone spoke about him because he had managed to bring order to the market, that thanks to him that place was no longer the same as before. Urfa laughed again and confidently assured her that the market was in his hands, that he always had it under control and that he had even been able to organize great armies, as if to suggest that he had everything under his command. At that moment Humaira looked at Urfa's friend and made some discreet gestures, to which the friend also responded with the same sign, as if they understood each other without words. Urfa, wanting to appear attentive, told Humaira that he hoped she would not suffer losses, because it was clear she had invested a lot in what she was doing. She replied calmly that all the aromas she had in that place had been brought from different parts of the world, that they were unique perfumes. Urfa, with a certain air of criticism, asked her how it occurred to her to open a fragrance business for strangers in the middle of the market, saying that kind of product was not what they needed there. According to him, she had placed it in the wrong place, and the most convenient thing would be to sell it directly to the women of the palace, since in that way she could make better use of it. Humaira, instead of arguing, looked again at Urfa's friend, and once more they exchanged silent gestures. After that, she told Urfa that if he wanted, she could offer him her perfumes, but that her intention was also to sell them to the emirs. To convince him a little more, she began showing him the bottles she had, displaying one in particular which she called Magic. As she showed him the perfume, she recommended that he calm down, that she saw him very nervous, and invited him to smell it quietly. Urfa obeyed and began smelling the bottle, and in doing so he started laughing, enjoying the scent, so much that he poured all of its contents onto his hands. His friend stopped him a little and told him he had to be careful, that with that minimal amount it was enough, because it was very valuable. However, Urfa paid him no attention and ended up using too much, while Humaira watched him and remarked that half of it would have been sufficient. Urfa, with his confident attitude, replied that everything was perfect for an emir, implying that he always deserved the best. Meanwhile, Cuddy was informing Emir Salahuddin that they were not yet close, but that they were about to arrive. He also told him that probably that factory would be moved to a place closer to the city. As they advanced together, they began talking about the posts they had once held. Cuddy recalled that at the beginning he had always been in Alexandria, where he was Hadid's assistant, but later he was transferred by direct orders of His Excellency the Caliph. Later, when Saver was appointed vizier, he was designated president of construction, and now his duty was to continue with that responsibility. Emir Salahuddin commented that in several meetings he had heard talk of Damascus, and that Cuddy's skill in Baslian was often mentioned. He then asked him if he was aware of what his real problem had been. Cuddy confessed that he had destroyed many human lives because of his ambition for greatness and also for trying to mitigate poverty. Emir Salahuddin wanted to know if that had been inevitable, but Cuddy replied that everything was before the eyes of each person, that things happened as far as their hands and words reached, but that whatever he did, he could not avoid it. Then Emir Salahuddin told him that he had heard that this was precisely his nature, and that for him to return to the throne, even reaching the palace of Damascus, much time would still pass. He asked him to tell him the real reason why he had tried to persuade the Sultan. Cuddy explained that he had not done it to protect the current throne, for in reality that place should be occupied only by the true owners, until someone worthy of that position appeared. Emir Salahuddin only listened to him in silence, and together they continued walking. At that moment, everyone was busy working when Cuddy and Emir Salahuddin arrived at the place they were looking for. They approached a man, and he, surprised, asked how they had managed to get there, insinuating if perhaps they had run out of paper to write on. Cuddy clarified to him that he would return later for that matter, because now they had another need. He told him that they were conducting an important investigation and that they needed the truth. The man took the paper and read it, admitting that it did come from him, but assured that if he had known what they would use it for, he would never have given it. Emir Salahuddin explained to him that Ozan had been killed and that they had left that writing beside him, and although they did not know if it was an old or recent matter, everything seemed suspicious. For that reason, they asked him if he had noticed any customer with strange behavior. The man then recalled a scruffy fellow who had arrived recently, with a scar on his face. He did not want to imagine things, but admitted that he did not like his behavior at all. Cuddy asked him if he had had the opportunity to talk to him, but the man said no, that he only saw him as suspicious and preferred not to approach. He only handed him the paper he requested in exchange for money, and the man left with a considerable amount. Emir Salahuddin wanted to know if he was actually among them, so the man called for another to come closer. Salim appeared and confessed that he knew where he had left that paper that day. Emir Salahuddin and Cuddy looked at each other smiling, realizing they had a new clue. In the dungeon, Lord Jayam confessed to the Sibyl that he had helped take out the money because it had been his friend's last wish to return it to its true owners and leave Europe never to return again. He assured her that this was the only thing he wanted, that the gold would go back to the place from where it had come. The Sibyl looked at him with disbelief and told him that such a thing was absurd. He insisted that without his help, they would never have achieved it, and that was the only thing he did. She replied that what had happened between Balaya and them was a very old story, something that was already over. But Lord Jayam said that he had noticed an expression on her face very similar to the one she made when Balaya was mentioned, and that he was only curious. The Sibyl answered that it was all due to a misunderstanding, that it had been a childish madness. Lord Jayam accepted that perhaps it was madness, but clarified that he only committed it because of her, because he was in love. He acknowledged that she was not, but even so, he accepted it. The Sibyl then promised him that she would get him out of there, that she would speak again with her father and find a way to resolve the situation. Lord Jayam asked her not to worry and simply to make the best decision. He warned her that in the new order they did not want him, because her father wished for her to be given other opportunities. She, however, assured him that she would not leave him there, caressing his face and promising that everything would be fine. Meanwhile, Latif was very excited because his father, Siet, was going to inaugurate the new shop. Everything seemed to be going well, until suddenly he discovered his father lying on the ground. A little girl began to scream upon seeing the scene, and Latif was left paralyzed, unable to believe what was happening. He noticed that there was someone hooded, dressed in a black cloak, who had been the cause of the attack and was now fleeing the place. Urfa, realizing that it was someone dangerous, began to chase him without losing sight, while Latif watched his father lying on the ground, unable to accept what had just happened.